When the sun comes up on America, across open fields, small towns, and city streets, a new day begins. And here, we rise with it. This is where hard work meets headlines, where truth matters, and America wakes up informed.
An interesting week.
They all are.
This is your country. This is your morning. This is Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. America, let's do it together.
Love you, Ivy.
Love you too.
And it starts right now.
Live from the campus of Hillsdale College in beautiful Hillsdale, Michigan. This is Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve this morning on Daybreak. Good morning, everyone. Here are three big things you need to know. Number one, Department of Homeland Security funding bill has been passed by the House, signed by the President. The bill funds most of DHS, minus ICE and Border Patrol. Those will be taken care of through a reconciliation process. At least that's the plan. DHS, which includes Secret Service, TSA, had been unfunded for 76 days, the longest funding lapse for a single federal department in U.S. history. Yes, we're cracking the record books here, people. Number two, the House primary election next month in Louisiana is on hold. Governor Jeff Landry there says that this week's Supreme Court decision prohibits voting under the current maps. He's giving the legislature time to redraw them. That could result in one extra Republican seat down in Louisiana. And number three, labor unions, Democrat-backed organizations, and communists all across the country planning massive May Day celebrations today and demonstrations across the U.S. Now, in Chicago, public schools there, officials say they're trying to keep the doors open, even though the teachers' union there says it plans to embrace a no school, no work, no shopping day of protest. And that's where we start hour one here on Daybreak. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy here on the program this morning. Thanks so much for joining me and us here on Daybreak. I'm here at Hillsdale College, where I serve as a lecturer in journalism, general manager of the student radio station here, the award-winning WRFH, and director of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. Also, frequent fill-in host for Steve. Been doing it for nearly a decade now. Man, it's been a lot of fun. You can find me online, scottbertram.com, SCOTBERTRAM, or on X, where I spend some time, at Scott Bertram. Again, SCOTBERTRAM. Coming up this hour, Dr. Jeremy Levin has a new book, Biotech in the Balance, Saving a Strategic Industry in an Age of Dissent. And speaking of teachers' unions, Camden Mulder from National Review report earlier this week over at NR.com about teachers' union money being funneled to Democratic candidates across the country. It's perhaps even more than you think. Speaking of teachers' unions, if you haven't been up on what's happening in Chicago with this May Day protest, the teachers' union in Chicago demanded the day off. It's not in the contract, but they said, give us the day off so we can all go protest, and we can take our students to go protest too. Action civics, they call it. And for some reason, the Chicago Public Schools leader had a backbone for a bit and said, no, we're not canceling classes. We're going to have school. That's the way it's going to be. Now, the mayor in Chicago, Brandon Johnson, is a stooge of the teachers' unions in Chicago, the CTU. They funded his campaign extensively. He's actually, I think, still technically an employee of the teachers' union, but is on leave as he serves as mayor. There's a weirdness happening there. He put a ton of pressure on the public schools chief. And so they reached some sort of agreement, a compromise in which the union got almost everything they wanted. The day of school in Chicago today, not canceled, but the city is paying for buses to shuttle students to protests around the city, and they're giving out free lunches too. And the union worked an agreement so that no teacher who skips school today can be punished by the school district. So in Chicago, you'll see the indoctrination, you'll see the students being shuttled to protests and May Day demonstrations across the city. Because at core, as we'll talk with Camden later on, the teachers' unions don't exist to teach our students. It's not what they're designed to do. It's not their main objective. The teachers' union exists to serve the teachers and to extract the highest salary, the most benefits. That's what that's what it exists to do. And in this case, teachers wanted May Day off to go protest. Union steps in, says, "Hey, school's not important." And a lesson we learned from COVID, by the way, if you start telling students and you start telling parents that school's unimportant and you don't actually have to come to school, they might actually believe you. They might actually believe you. Just after yesterday's daybreak closed, or right near the end of the show, we found out that the governor of Maine had dropped out of the Democratic primary for U.S. Senate in that state, which means the guy with the Nazi tattoo, Graham Planter, is going to be the Democratic nominee for U.S. Senate in Maine. And now everyone rallies around the anti Israel candidate, the guy who's posted some really weird stuff on X, the guy who has the Nazi tattoo on his chest and says, they say he's the guy. He's the blue collar oysterman who can win the U.S. Senate seat and turn Maine blue, at least from the purplish state it's in now. I mean, Susan Collins is not the most conservative member of the U.S. Senate, but she is a Republican, and she does vote in a lot of ways with the rest of the Republican caucus in the U.S. Senate. So Graham Planter, and I can't imagine the amount of opposition research that's available now to drop on Graham Planter. Up until now, it's only been Democrats dropping Oppo research, and now Republicans can get in the game as well. Planter, by the way, is an extreme guy. Remember, they're going to paint him as the blue collar guy from Maine. He's got the goatee. He works with his hands. He finds oysters. He's an extreme guy. This is him campaigning earlier, talking about court packing and impeaching justices on the Supreme Court. Graham Planter, the soon to be Democratic nominee for U.S. Senate in Maine. This is cut 6.
There is structural power in the Senate to deal with the Supreme Court. It's going to matter, it's going to require us to get the majority. But at that point, I very much think that we need to be exercising ethics oversight over the court. If we held Supreme Court justices to the exact same standards we hold federal judges, there is a compelling case for the impeachment and removal of at least 2. But to make that happen, we need to elect people to the Senate that want to wield power like that, who understand that power matters, that it's real and you can use it.
That's Graham Planter, is going to be the Democratic U.S. Senate candidate in Maine, saying, "Hey, if we change the rules and judge them by a completely different standard, we could impeach a couple of justices." Chris Van Hollen, Democrat senator, says, "Hey, don't worry about that Nazi tattoo because he was in a bad place way back when." Cut 10.
The dude has not had a Nazi tattoo. I mean, let's be clear about what's going on here. I mean, how do you view that? I mean, it seems to be at least somewhat disqualifying in traditional.
Certainly historically.
So look, I mean, let's take a couple issues, including the comments he's made in the past. I mean, he's been very clear that he went into combat on behalf of the United States. He went through a really rough period, PTSD type period. And he has himself said there are lots of things he's done and said that he completely regrets. And I do believe people should have second chances and that people can learn from their mistakes. And I think he's been doing that.
Every Republican is a closet racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe, but the guy with the Nazi tattoo he didn't really mean it, right? Didn't mean it. Hear from President Trump coming up next year on Daybreak. Welcome back. It's Daybreak. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy this morning on the program. They're back on Monday, never fear. I'll take you into the weekend. Thanks for joining us here on the show. Jeremy Levin will be with us in a couple of minutes, about 10 minutes or so, talking about his new book, Biotech in the Balance. Camden Mulder from National Review also in the back half of the hour, as she's got a story about $1 billion heading from teachers' union dues over to Democratic candidates across the country. We'll talk with her about that. Lots happening in D.C. yesterday. Both President Trump speaking a number of times at a number of places yesterday, and Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, talking with lawmakers and getting into a few back and forths. And, Pete Hegseth is okay. He can hold his own if he gets into arguments with members of the House or members of the Senate, largely about the war in Iran, where it stands, where it's going, what the strategy is, and where we go from here. And, there's a lot of back and forth, as I said, with various members. I thought this was maybe the most important part, giving an update on where we stand and what's standing in the way of success, essentially. Pete Hegseth yesterday updates us on the war in Iran. This is Cut 5.
President Trump has the courage, has had, unlike other presidents, to ensure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon and that their nuclear blackmail never succeeds. We have the best negotiator in the world driving a great deal. Unfortunately, as I said yesterday, and I'll say it again today, the biggest adversary we face at this point are the reckless naysayers and defeatist words of congressional Democrats and some Republicans. Defeatists from the cheap seats who 2 months in seek to undermine the incredible efforts that have been undertaken and the historic nature of taking on a 47-year threat with the courage no other president has had, to great success and great opportunity for preventing Iran from having a nuclear weapon.
That's Pete Hegseth yesterday, Secretary of War. Got into a back and forth with, I think it was Patty Murray later on, in which Murray said, hey, Iran was no threat to us. Iran's a peaceful nation. They weren't going to threaten us. And Pete Hegseth says, did you hear them say death to America? And Murray has to say, well, our adversaries use words like that all the time. It's just exaggeration. They don't really mean it. President Trump acted boldly, swiftly to take out an enemy of the United States. And we are, less than 2 months into the conflict? And yes, the Q word, the quagmire word is being thrown around. There is a strategy. It is being executed. There are short-term effects. Rising gas prices is one of them. But the president yesterday saying he's confident those gas prices will come down after the war is over. And we are not even close yet on a national average to the record, which was in 2022, which was under President Joe Biden. So as much as you hear people freaking out, especially in the media, remember, highest gas prices, not yet. That was under Joe Biden. Speaking of President Trump yesterday doing a couple of signings in the Oval Office. One very interesting piece that expands the options of retirement accounts for all Americans, giving them access to the same kind of retirement accounts that members of Congress have. But he also took some Q&A, as he does with the press and the media. And, you can say what you want about President Trump, and many, many people do, but you can't say he's not a funny guy. You can't say he doesn't know how to tell a joke. President Trump yesterday being asked about the possibility of wearing a bulletproof vest after, multiple assassination attempts on his life. This is President Trump yesterday, Cut 8.
Is there talks about you potentially wearing a bulletproof vest moving forward, given you have now been shot at?
I don't know if I can handle looking 20 pounds heavier. These guys, they look so good. Some of these guys are physical specimens. Some of these guys are trouble. I don't want to be near him. If you want to gain 20 to 25 pounds, get a vest. And frankly, the vest did an amazing job.
Yeah, Vest worked on the agent in the attack, and the president says, yeah, if you want to add 20, 30 pounds, I'm not sure I can handle that wearing a bulletproof vest. And those media members, the White House press corps, most of them did not want to laugh at the president's joke. And yet, at some point, you break down because it's a good line. It's a good line. There was some video released yesterday, too, Don't have that to play, but the video released from DOJ of those moments before the guy stormed and ran through the security checkpoint. And, it's pretty standard stuff. It is interesting in the background. They had this circled in the video. If you see it online, there is a dog, a police dog that's sniffing. And the guy, the suspect, the guy who guy ran through security, disappears through a door. The dog follows him and sniffs and is like, he's being very suspicious. And seconds later, the guy bursts out and begins to run through the security checkpoint. There was some internet speculation that the agent who was shot was caught in friendly fire, that it was one of our people, be it Secret Service or someone else, who ended up shooting the agent. The video released in part to prove that was not the case. This was a shot from the shooter who ended up hitting the agent, who's going to be okay. As the president said, the bulletproof vest did his job. But I'd be interested to hear from the guy who was handling the dog. The dog seemed to sense something was wrong with this guy who ended up running through security and trying to attack the president and his administration. Very quickly here, one more cut from President Trump yesterday, asking about if he's changed his philosophy. Do you think about another assassination attempt when you're out there being president on a daily basis? This is cut number 9.
How nervous are you about it happening again, another assassination attempt?
I don't think about it.
You don't think about it at all?
If I did, I wouldn't be doing a very good job here. I'd be thinking about nothing but that. I don't think about it. I don't think about it. If I did, I wouldn't be effective.
He's right. You've got to trust the Secret Service agents who are there to protect your life. You've got to trust that the intelligence and others are on the case in terms of sniffing out, no pun intended, potential plots. And you've got to do the job as president. And if you're continually worried about something like that, another attack, you won't be effective. The president's right about that. We'll see if he takes the advice and adds the 20, 30 pounds of the bulletproof vest. My guess is he won't. He doesn't seem like a guy who's going to go through with that sort of plan. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve on this morning's Daybreak. It's Daybreak. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy this morning. They're back on Monday morning. Thanks for being alongside. You can find me online, scottbertram.com, or at Scott Bertram over on X, SCOTBERTRAM. Glad to be alongside this morning. Dr. Jeremy Levin will be with us in just a couple of minutes, talking about his brand new book, which is out later on this month. First, this portion of the Daybreak brought to you by the Wellness Company. It's a groundbreaking new study out. It shows there's a safe and inexpensive potential cancer treatment. It's a drug that many of us already know about, ivermectin. New study shows that individuals who took ivermectin, the parasite-fighting medication that gained fame during the COVID pandemic, saw remarkable results in their battles with cancer. This incredibly promising results have many Americans wondering where they could obtain U.S.-made ivermectin and mebendazole. That's where the Wellness Company comes in. You see and hear from the Wellness Company doctors all the time right here. You know that their products are the gold standard for keeping you and your family safe and healthy. The Wellness Company is making 100% American-made ivermectin and mebendazole available to viewers at an incredibly affordable price point. Say no to Big Pharma's greed and no to Big Pharma's poison. Say yes to a company that you can trust to bring you safe, affordable, and effective treatments. If you or someone you love is interested in ivermectin and mebendazole, then you can go to twc.health/Gruber and order. That's twc.health/Gruber. Use the promo code Gruber to save 10% there. Perhaps not a risk to your health, but I saw this yesterday. Asian jumping worms have invaded 38 states. Be on the lookout. Asian worms that can leap a foot in the air, spreading across the U.S. They've turned up in 38 states. The jumping worms can grow up to 6 inches long. They're red, brown, sometimes metallic looking. They eat important nutrients in soil and leaf litter that plants need to sprout and grow. And so, experts say, you don't want those invasive pests around. If you spot a jumping worm, and I guess that would be the worm that's jumping a foot off the ground, that's a jumping worm, drown them in vinegar or seal them in a plastic bag and leave it in the sun for 10 minutes before throwing it away. That's how to dispose of the Asian jumping worm if you see one near you. Be on alert. Scott Bertram in for Steve this morning here on Daybreak. Welcome back. Daybreak. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy this morning on this Friday morning, taking you into the weekend. Thanks so much for joining us. You can find the show online, too, at stevegruber.com and over on X at Steve Gruber Show. I'm sure he'll appreciate a follow if you're so inclined this morning. Dr. Jeremy Levin is with us this morning. He's executive chairman of Ovid Therapeutics. He's got a long background in the health industry and a new book coming out later on this month. So stack it where you shop. Biotech in the Balance: Saving a Strategic Industry in an Age of Distrust. Dr. Levin, thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning, Scott. Great pleasure to be with you.
Good to talk. I want to ask first, it is an age of distrust, and COVID didn't help anything whatsoever. So why should people trust you? Meaning, just tell us a bit about your background and how you came to write this book.
My background's pretty straightforward. Did a PhD at Oxford, looked at DNA, tried to understand genes, then got really enamored of how you could actually use that knowledge to help patients. Went to Cambridge, did medicine, and then with great good fortune came to the United States in '87 and have grown up in the pharmaceutical industry ever since then. Led tiny companies, led one of the most largest company and provided about 1 in 6 pills to everybody in America. That was a company called Teva. And then when I'd done that, I thought, no, I have to continue doing what I do, which is to work and focus only on patients. So started a tiny little company, which I love, which is Ovid Therapeutics, and have worked in that. So giant company, 50,000 people, 170 countries, down to 5 people sitting in a room and saying, how can we invent something to change the diseases in people's brains?
So I was at the local pharmacy. I was at Walgreens this past weekend picking up a prescription, and I'm standing there waiting, and I look behind and I see that wall of bags of pharmaceuticals, right? Prescriptions. I'm at a little small town here in the middle of nowhere, Michigan, and that's one of the probably 5 places you can get a prescription in our town. And I just think so many people are reliant on all those prescriptions to live their life on a daily basis. And I begin to wonder, as I know I'm going to talk to you this week, is this an underreported story? Meaning this is something that affects perhaps, as you said, at least 60, 70% of the population. And they're things we need on a daily basis. And maybe we're not talking quite enough about this, which is why Biotech in the Balance is such an important book.
Scott, you put your finger on something terribly important. You, me, our children, our grandparents, our sisters, our brothers, our spouses are all going to be patients at one stage or another. And for people like me who work in the biotech world, it's also terribly important to know that every time you give a medicine to somebody, you change their life. And when you do that, you have the opportunity with some of the extraordinary medicines that we've invented over the last 30, 40 years to completely change things. You can cure cancer, you can stop disorders. There are certain steps that have been taken in the biotech world which are remarkable, and it is an underreported area. We focus only on one segment of it at times. That's some terrible things that some companies do by raising prices and other companies do by selling addictive drugs like the opioids. But what is underreported is the extraordinary day by day work of American scientists who go into the lab, try and find a new medicine and fail, and then come back the next day to try and get it done. And the biotech industry is extraordinary. It's a uniquely American thing. It grew up here since about 1980, and it's now, there are about 1,000 companies, and they produce 70% of all of the new medicines that go into these giant pharmaceutical companies. And that's a critical component of America. And that's why, for me, Scott, it's so important that we understand this. And it's difficult. It's hard science. It's not, sometimes it's words that nobody understands, and that's not a good thing. And you're helping do that by actually helping people understand that.
Dr. Jeremy Levin is with us. His new book out this month, Biotech in the Balance: Saving a Strategic Industry in an Age of Distrust. So as people do pick up those prescriptions, they see what they're paying for those prescriptions. And for many, it's probably far more than they want. How do we get to a point where not all, but many medications are past the grasp of people for whom they would really help? And what can we do about it?
Boy, isn't that a terrible situation? It's actually not right. How is it that when you go to the pharmacy, you have to shell out any money? Why are the insurance companies doing this? This is crazy. Why is it that you have, let's say you have your appendix taken out. Your appendix, which was taken out 25 years ago, cost you the same price, roughly. It cost you really not nearly as much as you could have done then as now. Drug prices have risen. The same drug that was 25 years ago, very expensive. That's not acceptable. What is acceptable is the system that we've put in place, which says a new drug, something brand new that really cures you, that does a big difference, should be priced appropriately. And the insurance companies should pay for it. There should be no out of pocket. I don't like that at all. But then the drug should be in your hands. And then when it goes generic, the price should drop dramatically. And that's an essential thing. That is the natural course. But what nobody sees, nobody in America wants to acknowledge this in the policymakers or elsewhere, between where it's manufactured in the pharmaceutical company and when you and I go to CVS, Walmarts, etc., and we get our medicine, there's a whole bunch of middlemen. They take over 50%, 50, the gross, it's called, of the price of that drug and put it into their pocket. They put billions of dollars into their pocket and take it out of the American public, and nobody sees it. What they do see, of course, is that the pharmaceutical companies have priced it like that. Well, there's a thing called a PBM. Most of us have never heard of it. The PBM sits right between the patient, the insurance company, and the pharmaceutical company and says, you know what? I get a percentage of that drug price and put it into my pocket and tell everybody that I'm helping to reduce prices. To me, Scott, that's really not American.
Yeah.
That's just something which we should stop.
We've got about 45 seconds left here, but I wanted to make sure we talked about this issue that you raise about our supply and how China is positioning itself to be our sole supplier in a few years. You would think after COVID we'd be far more protective about sourcing our pharmaceuticals and sourcing all sorts of stuff from inside our borders. So again, just a short amount of time here, but what should we be worried about and what can we look to change?
We should be worried about one thing. Firstly, America needs to understand that the biotechnology industry is a strategic asset for the United States, just like batteries, just like electric cars. All of these and special minerals, all the Chinese did exactly the same thing, very openly. They just said, we'll do it here. They have a strategic plan, and they've said that in 2035, they will be the leading producers of medicines in the world. We will have given it to them, because we don't look at this industry in this country, in Washington, as a strategic industry. We must do that. If we don't do that, we will actually hand over the rights to most of the medicines that we have and the ability to make them in the next few years.
Dr. Jeremy Levin, the book is Biotech in the Balance. Thanks for joining us.
Many thanks.
Good Friday morning to you. Daybreak. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve this morning. Find me online, scottbertram.com, or I corral all my media doings. Also at Scott Bertram over on X. Steve and I be back on Monday for Monday's Daybreak. Camden Mulder with us right now. She's William F. Buckley Jr. Fellow in Political Journalism over at National Review. You can read her and others at nationalreview.com. Camden, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Scott. Thank you so much for having me today.
A couple of stories that you've been reporting on this week over at nationalreview.com that I wanted to cover. One just yesterday on Department of Justice report on anti-Christian bias, anti-Christian prosecution inside the Biden administration. What do we know now?
Yeah, Scott. So this report, unfortunately, it was not shocking given previous reporting we've seen on the Biden administration per se persecuting pro-life activists for their beliefs. But essentially, the DOJ came out and said that in various different ways, the Biden administration was coming after Americans for specifically traditional Christian values. So the administration was fine with, people living out their faith privately, but people who were doing so on a more public front were persecuted for doing so. For example, Grand Canyon University, an openly Christian university, was hit with almost $40 million in fees because they, quote, wanted to protect the students there. So this is just really disturbing and really frustrating, especially as we're seeing more and more Americans turning to faith and turning to church.
On the topic of religious freedom, I just talked with religious freedom advocate here on campus recently here at Hillsdale, and there is this argument on the left that says, oh, you're free to believe whatever you want. The moment you begin to act on those beliefs is the moment we can prosecute you, and the moment we can punish you for actually acting on those religious beliefs. And for all the gains that we have made on the subject of religious freedom through Supreme Court rulings over the past decade or so, there's still a long way to go, and I think that's something that this report points out.
For sure. And even just being, quote, guilty by association was enough in some examples. We saw, famously the Richmond situation with the FBI field office. They completely persecuted a Catholic church in the area just because there was a man who, was a career criminal. He had been seeking out explosives and guns, and he had attended that church a couple times. And the Biden administration took the opportunity to go after this Richmond Catholic parish just because this man had gone there. And, that was for sure in part for the fact that they were a Catholic church, they were rooted in the traditional Latin Mass. And so it's just really frustrating to see that they would go after them in this way when they obviously had nothing to do with this man who was, planning to commit these crimes.
Camden Mulder with us this morning at National Review, nationalreview.com for more. A report from earlier this week from Camden on the amount of money swishing around from the teachers' unions to Democratic candidates, Democratic causes. It's more than you think, probably. How about $1 billion? Billion with a B since 2015. I'm no math expert, but you average that out. That's about $100 million a year going from teachers to political causes. What did this report from Defending Education show us?
Yeah, Scott. So there was about $669 million on behalf of national teachers unions, $339 million on behalf of local teachers unions since 2015. So as you said, that's quite a substantial amount per year. And with the national teachers unions, for example, we saw it going to House and Senate majority super PACs, For Our Future, which is a climate activism group, even the Trevor Project, which was recently defunded by the Trump administration. They lost a $26 million contract because they're trying to convince young, quote, gender dysphoric children to transition and often do so behind their parents' back. The Trevor Project, for example, they have a platform called Trevor Space, and National Review's reported extensively on this. And a parent told us it's a quote, Pandora's box of sexually perverse content. So teachers unions are giving groups like that money, and it just really calls into question, at this point, what's even the point of a teachers union? Why are we giving them their money? And teachers should be really frustrated by the fact that their dues and fees that they contribute to these unions are being spent in this way.
Yeah, remember, teachers' unions have no money unless they take it or extract it from the members of the union. And you do that to a tune of $1 billion over the past decade. I think there was some thought that post Janus, the Supreme Court ruling that allowed teachers to sort of opt out from a lot of these union fees and dues, that the political power of unions might be somewhat diminished. I think the report tells us it's at least going to take a little bit longer than 10 years to sort of make that happen.
Yeah, for sure. And when these unions are just such a strong political arm at this point, to, as you said, dismantle that power is just, it's going to take a long time. And it's going to take reports like these to help inform teachers that this is where their money's going. This is what this means. It's being a part of the union no longer means fighting for better work conditions and higher pay. In reality, you're funding, let's say, the DAGA political fund, which, contributes to local attorney general's races, and we saw that they contributed to Jay Jones, his campaign, even giving him almost $1 million after the murder text scandal was reported by National Review. So teachers need to just really be paying attention to where their money's going, what unions they're willing to support, to hopefully, if they are able to, pull their support, it would show the unions that teachers mean business and they're not looking to have their money contribute to these causes.
You can find that story and more over at nationalreview.com. Camden Mulder is William F. Buckley Jr. Fellow in Political Journalism. There, Camden, thanks so much for joining us. You're on Daybreak.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. That's Camden Mulder at National Review. Read her stuff over at nationalreview.com. Coming up, hour 2 of Daybreak this morning, we'll talk with James David Dixon about citizen-only voting. Why are so many people opposed to that on the left? Congressman Tim Walberg from Michigan, some questions for him. And then William Elliott Hazelgrove, one of my favorite authors and interviews, has a brand new book out about the Al Capone's Vault, the big Geraldo special from the late 80s that if you were around and watching TV then, you probably saw it. More people watched that special than the Super Bowl that year. And a new book tells all about that happenstance. We'll talk with him coming up next hour as well. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve. This is the Friday edition of Daybreak. It's Daybreak with Scott Bertram this morning, filling in for Steve. Thanks so much for joining us as we take you into the weekend and give you a little something to look forward to on Monday. That's a new edition of Forgotten America, the stories the mainstream media won't tell you. That's what Forgotten America is all about with Steve and Ivy Gruber. In the newest episode, Steve and Ivy sit down with Leonard Sachs for revealing conversation you'll be talking about long after it's over. It drops Monday morning, 9 a.m. Eastern on the Steve Gruber YouTube channel. And here is a little nugget, a little preview of what's coming.
The Disney Channel is a major vector of what I've come to call the culture of disrespect. This is not the culture of the Andy Griffith Show. It's not the culture of family ties. In writing The Collapse of Parenting, the new edition published last year, I've reviewed the 100 most popular TV shows to see how many of them portray a parent as knowledgeable, competent, reliable. Out of 100 shows, I found one, Blue Blood, starring Tom Selleck, which is now off the air, I might add. One show out of 100 that portrays a parent as competent. That show was a unique outlier. A much more typical show would be Modern Family, where the straight dad is always an incompetent bungler. His three kids are always more reliable and insightful than their idiot father. This is the culture of disrespect. This is the culture in which American kids now grow up.
That's Leonard Sachs. He's the guest on the new Forgotten America with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Set your calendars now. Set your alarms. Monday morning, 9 a.m. Eastern on the Steve Gruber YouTube channel. And speaking of Forgotten America, stick around just after the top of the hour. We'll come back. There is a New York Times story from earlier this week that my mouth was agape as I read. It's trying to explain why some people, don't want to have kids. And you want to talk about the gap, the chasm between real America and whatever America is happening in New York and the left coast. This was a great example of that. We'll talk about it in just a couple of minutes. Also in hour two, as I mentioned, James David Dixon, Congressman Tim Walberg, William Elliott Hazelgrove, and more. You'll want to stick around for more. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve on this morning's Daybreak.
America's awake, and we're just getting started. The headlines that matter, the stories they won't tell you, and the voices fighting to be heard. This is your country, your morning, your daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. A new hour starts right now on Real America's Voice.
Live from the campus of Hillsdale College in beautiful Hillsdale, Michigan. This is Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve on Daybreak. Welcome to it. Here are three big things you need to know. Number one, President Trump reiterating that gas prices will fall once the war with Iran is over. Speaking from the Oval Office yesterday, Trump said Iran is dying to make a deal. Said a current obstacle to the war, ending the war, is not knowing who's leading that country right now. Most of its leadership has been killed. Number two, House lawmakers have advanced a measure that would allow SNAP recipients to purchase hot rotisserie chicken with their benefits. Lawmakers in the House voting overwhelmingly, 384 to 35. You can't find agreement like that on any issue, to support and amend the 2008 Food and Nutrition Act. The measure modifies the definition of food to add hot rotisserie chicken. It now heads to the Senate as part of the Farm Bill, so you might go to Costco or your local grocery store if you need to, pick up a rotisserie chicken via SNAP benefits. And number three, Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson says her office has identified more than 2.1 million outdated voter registrations that now have been removed or flagged for removal. That includes more than 180,000 people who have not voted in at least 20 years. Roughly 1.5 million registrations have been canceled, 600,000 marked inactive. They could be removed if two more federal election cycles go by, and those people do not respond to mail or don't vote in those elections. That's where we start hour two of Daybreak. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy this morning. Thanks so much for being alongside. They're back on Monday. You've got me today. I'm here on the campus of Hillsdale College, where I serve as general manager of the award-winning student radio station, WRFH, Michigan's four-time in a row College Audio Station of the Year. Proud of our students here for making that happen. Also a lecturer in journalism and director of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. All our fine Hillsdale College audio is out there. If I might put a brief plug in for the new edition of the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, which I host and are heard on many fine radio stations across the country. This week's guest, the wonderful, fantastic, personal friend of mine, Mollie Hemingway, who's also a senior journalism fellow here at Hillsdale College. She has an incredible new book, a New York Times bestseller, Alito. And with the ruling this week, the majority opinion he penned on redistricting, never a better time to hear from Mollie Hemingway. We go in depth on the new book, Alito, on this week's Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. You can find that, again, on many fine radio stations across the country this weekend, or in podcast form, too, wherever you get your audio. I might link to it, too, over at my X site, at Scott Bertram, SCOTBERTRAM. All right, this New York Times story from earlier this week, read it with mouth agape. So many stories and so much conversation about the declining birth rate in the United States and around the world. But, you know, we can't control around the world. We can control what happens here in our country. And the New York Times, the intrepid New York Times, set out to explain why. And they come up with this piece titled, Rising Costs Are Causing Couples to Delay or Forego Having Children. But what the piece proves is that it's not rising costs at all that are causing these couples to forego or delay having children. It is because they simply don't want to have children, which is okay. You can make that choice. But to sort of lie about it or obfuscate the point by saying, oh, if we didn't have to do this, we'd have 12 children. The people in this is such great examples of the difference between real America and America on some of the coasts, Los Angeles, New York, big cities. There are three couples featured in this piece in the New York Times. And the best reasons they have, these are the reasons they give for not having children. They say a 2,000-foot house, 2,000 square foot. How big is your house? This couple, 25 years old, by the way, say a 2,000 square foot house would not be big enough to have a child. Not like 6 children, 1. They say they won't have a child because a 2,000 square foot house is not big enough. They'd have to upgrade and get a larger house if they had a kid. They also say, well, dad would have to give up hobbies like golfing. Couldn't golf anymore if you had a kid. Someone else, another couple says, well, we might not have money for our kids to do activities. And so we don't want to bring a child into the world if we don't have money for their activities. This last couple takes the cake. I have to read this to you. 29-year-old Imani Menard, 31-year-old Austin Cunningham. The decision not to have children came down to the life they've built and what it would take to change it. They were married in 2023, so 3 years ago. They've shaped their relationship around exploring new places together, like Japan, Bali, and Morocco. That lifestyle, though, this is the sob story for the New York Times, has become more expensive. In the wake of the war in Iran, airlines have been raising prices, checked bag fees to cover soaring fuel costs. The couple have felt it firsthand. A flight to France for a wedding cost them $1,600 round trip. The same time last year, a similar trip was only $400 round trip, they said. With a child, going to that wedding in France would have been more difficult, and it would mean fewer trips around the globe this year. At home, their expenses already are significant. Get this, the couple have a 1-bedroom apartment in Manhattan. What do you think they pay for that 1-bedroom apartment in Manhattan? No, it's more than that. No, it's more than that. They pay $5,000 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment in Manhattan. They care for a poodle they adopted last year. They pay $600 a month for doggy daycare. Those are the excuses given for not having children in this piece from the New York Times. All right, here's the problem. The people in this piece are not going to have children. No matter what tax credits you give them, because everyone's talking about how do we spur people to have more children? How do we make it easier? Do we just give them money to have kids? Do we make the child tax credit larger? Do we do this? Do we do that? The people in this piece are making decisions that they don't want children. No matter what incentives we offer them, nothing will change. If we give the globe-trotting family or couple more money, they're going to use it to travel more. They're not going to have children. There always will be an excuse for not having kids. Oh, the house isn't big enough. Oh, we can't do this. Oh, we want to do that. We got to do this wedding. We can't. I got to take care of the dog. By the way, the first couple who says the 2,000 square foot house isn't big enough and they don't have enough money, they care for, at least in a picture in this piece, 2 cats and a dog. I don't know if they're spending money on doggy daycare too. Look, it's a culture thing for sure. Tim Carney's written a lot about this. Got to change the culture. Got to make it easier for parents to be parents, without a doubt. But kids are great. They're one of the best things, if not the best thing you can do in life. They give you a reason to live. They give you a reason to strive. They give you a reason to do better. The guy who says, oh, I got to give up golfing if I have a kid, doing your hobbies with your kids when they get old enough is like the best feeling in the entire world. Going to baseball games, go to football games, taking them out golfing, teaching them how to bowl, how to play baseball. It's all fantastic. But these couples the New York Times found, they're not going to have kids. They should just say, we're not having kids. That's fine. We can concentrate on other people who might be able to be convinced. More next on Daybreak.
New laws, new requirements.
It's Daybreak. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and I this morning. Thanks so much for being alongside. James Dixon joins us, a Michigan-based political strategist, commentator. He also hosts the James Dixon podcast and has worked at the Michigan Enjoyer, including a piece we'll talk about today, Who's Afraid of Citizen-Only Voting? You can find that at Michigan Enjoyer. James, thanks so much for joining us here on Daybreak.
Hey, Scott, it's great to see your face. Thank you for having me.
Good to see you, too. I just mentioned at the top of the hour, James, Michigan Secretary of State has identified 2.1 million outdated voter registrations that have been removed or flagged for removal. I have two questions. One, what are the questions we should consider when we hear that there are 2.1 million outdated voter registrations in a single state? And what does that mean across the country when it's 2.1 million in simply the state of Michigan?
That's exactly it. Excuse me. And Scott, you're taking the exact right approach to it. I don't look at that number as good news. I look at it and say, well, why were there that many fraudulent, inactive, dead, moved voter registrations in the first place? A, and B, I think about the timing, right? So in the 2024 election, there was something like 8.4 million people on the voter rolls in Michigan, and there was only like 8 million voting age adults in Michigan. And so you have this structural flab, hundreds of thousands of people still on our voter rolls who should not be. And my concern, Scott, is this. Eric, who Jocelyn Benson partners with, the idea is it's supposed to cull your voter rolls. They say nationwide 1 in 8 registrations is fraudulent. We still have 8 million people. That would mean we have up to 1 million voters registered in Michigan who should not be.
And we know in Michigan, non-citizens voted in the last election. We know for a fact, even Jocelyn Benson has admitted this. We don't know perhaps how many, but we know a number voted. And the response we always hear from the left is, well, that's such a small number. It's 1, it's 2, it's 16 in this case that we know for sure. That number should be 0, especially when we know we have the measures to do preventative measures to stop that from happening.
You know, Scott, I always look at the form and function of a government office, right? So, okay, you had the 16 illegal voters in 2024, at least 16, I think is the better way to frame it, because she purposely did a partial review so as to not find the real number. And so you could say, how did that happen in the first place? But then you have to ask, after the problem was discovered, what was done then? What's done to prevent that 16 and 24 from becoming 16,026? And the answer is nothing was done. Not one single change has been made to prevent the next Ho Ching Gao who voted illegally in Ann Arbor from voting again. And that alone should shock us, especially with Jocelyn Benson running for governor and counting her own votes this time around.
And again, if it's in Michigan, if it's elsewhere around the country, there is nothing that can be done after that vote is cast. It is gone. It is counted. It is part of the total. You can't go back and grab it out of the pile, so to speak. That's why all this has to be preventative measures to stop it from happening in the first place. James Dixon with us. You can find him at Michigan Enjoyer, James Dixon podcast. This piece over at the Enjoyer, Who's Afraid of Citizen-Only Voting? I find it laughable in this discussion over the SAVE Act, James, that those on the left, and that includes Jocelyn Benson here in Michigan, but many others say they think it's an argument on its face that they say, oh, the SAVE Act means it's going to be harder for people to vote, and it's going to make you prove you're a citizen. Can you believe that? They think that's an argument against this, and I think most Americans look at that and say, well, yeah, of course, that's what we want.
You know, you look at the anti-SAVE Act messaging, and to me, it shows the failures of the Democrat Media Alliance. They've gotten lazy together. It's like a couple that meets each other, and then they all gain 50 pounds together. They both gain 50 pounds. And so that's what I see here, is they're so not used to iron sharpening iron and their ideas being put to the test that they think they can play the cards from 40, 50 years ago and say, this is going to hurt minorities. Then no one believed that, because if you want to buy anything in this country, I sent a package at UPS the other day and I had to furnish ID. So you need ID to do just about everything, even if you're paying cash. And then they shifted it to women. thinking that that was going to work. And now you're just infantilizing women when we've had
Mhm.
women voting in America for a century now. So they're out of arguments, they're out of ideas. And you look again at the form and function, and it's clear that what they fear is the pathway to non citizens voting being shut and locked.
Yeah, and this pathway to non-citizens voting, again, those who support the SAVE Act and support integrity in the vote probably look and say, well, of course, but there are locations in this country, New York City among them, where there are significant pushes to allow non-citizens to vote. And maybe that's not on a
Right.
federal election at this point, but it is in local elections. And once that door gets open, someone's going to slam a foot in and try to break it wide open.
And we have that same structural problem in Michigan. Another thing people might not know. So say my wife is Canadian and not an American citizen yet and moves here, gets a driver's license. When she gets that driver's license, she's automatically registered to vote. The only way she would not automatically be registered to vote is if she furnishes proof at the moment she's getting the license that she's not an American. So if she simply comes and gets the driver's license and is like, okay, honor system, I just won't vote, then she will end up on our voter rolls. We have the opposite of a system that we should have that should make sure on the front end that only eligible Americans can vote. We used to have one under Ruth Johnson, under Jocelyn Benson. She doesn't want it that way.
James Dixon, you can read this piece at the Michigan Enjoyer, Who's Afraid of Citizen-Only Voting. Also check him out via the James Dixon podcast again. And as his shirt says, founder of the Make Politics Local Again movement. Always a great opportunity to talk, James. Thanks so much. We'll do it again soon.
Thank you, Scott.
Appreciate it. That's James Dixon coming up in around 10 minutes or so. Less than that, in fact. Congressman Tim Walberg. Questions for him about what's happening in the House this past week. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve here on Daybreak. Welcome back. Daybreak. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy this morning. They're back on Monday here on the program. And we'll talk with Congressman Tim Walberg in about, 5 minutes or so. Stick around. This portion of Daybreak brought to you by Birch Gold. When there are supply constraints on commodities, well, prices surge. You saw with fuel prices, the Strait of Hormuz was blockaded. And, well, what else is a limited commodity? It's gold. They mine it out of the ground. When it's gone, it's gone. Governments can't just print more gold. That's why everyone from central banks to savvy savers are diversified with gold. If you've been thinking about it for years, but have never moved some of your savings into physical gold, Birch Gold Group is one who can help you. Now through May 29th, Birch Gold is giving first-time gold buyers a rebate of up to $10,000 on qualifying purchases. For details and a free information kit on diversifying into gold, text America to 989898. Birch Gold can help you convert an existing IRA or a 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in physical gold. Text America to 989898. See if you qualify for a first-time gold buyer rebate of up to $10,000. Again, That's America to 989898 today, and Birch Gold Group. Last night was Fine Arts Night at my kids' school, which is a fun time. They've got art displayed all around the gymnasium, some really talented young artists, and then choir and advanced band. My son's a trumpet player. He plays piano. He actually plays organ too. He's played a few songs at church over the past 2 years or so, and then he also plays trumpet. And there's something uplifting about hearing these students, yes, struggle a bit, and then succeed in putting on a fine performance. It's fun. It's fun to see kids enjoying music and see some of our young people show their talents off too. So we had last week was the spring concert for the K through 8, and these are mostly 7th, 8th graders and high school students last night at Fine Arts Night, and a wonderful night had by all. And no admission too, which is great. And you can probably buy some of the art for pennies if you wish from the students themselves. Congressman Tim Walberg coming up next here on Daybreak. It's Daybreak. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy this morning. Thanks so much for joining us. You can find me on X at Scott Bertram, SCOTBERTRAM. Also, scottbertram.com, where I corral all my media doings. Pleased to welcome in Congressman Tim Walberg to the program. The congressman and I are actually in the same small town in Michigan and being beamed all across the country from this little small town in Michigan. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Well, it's great to be with you. And yes, I'll be in Hillsdale County, and Hillsdale City today for most of the day, and going to enjoy that experience. And I'm quickly say congratulations to your son for his musical ability. You know, I'm glad to hear that. We need to encourage that, and using some of the old traditional instruments like organ and piano and trumpet. My brother was a
Yeah.
trumpeter. I played clarinet. I still play my guitar every week in Congress for an event. Our bipartisan prayer breakfast every Thursday morning. So music is a great thing, and we need to use it.
We actually got a free organ, like a really nice organ, into the house. And what they don't tell you is free is great, but then you have to pay to move it because the professionals have to get involved to move something like that. So free organ costs something to move it into your house, but it's nice to have it there so we can practice.
Yeah.
Congressman, tell us this week, DHS bill is done. It's signed. The funding is there. A couple of carve outs. What took so long, and what actually ended up happening in the end?
Well, yes, it is done. It's been done in an ugly way. It shouldn't happen that way. And in the House, we passed a bipartisan 12 bill appropriations package, which included full funding for Homeland Security, which included all of its agencies, including ICE and Customs and Border, that are doing great work for this country because of what Biden did in bringing in illegal criminal aliens by the boatloads. And so we should have done it that way. We sent it 3 times over to the Senate, and Chuck Schumer and the Democrats refused to come on board and support security for our American citizens, and made it a political thing and a shutdown of 76 days, I believe it was. Fortunately, the president said, no way are we not going to fund TSA for the work they're doing and other parts of Homeland Security, not all of them. So some had to work without pay. They would be restored their pay, but that shouldn't be how we do it. And so out of frustration, finally, the House accepted the Senate's proposal to fund Homeland Security without funding ICE and Customs and Border. Fortunately, in the One Big Beautiful Bill, we did fund ICE and Customs and Border for most of their functions, and that has remained in place. But very soon, we'll have a reconciliation bill that will fund ICE and Customs and Border for 3 years, not just one, but for 3 years, to get that out of the political play that's been going on against President Trump, because that's the reason they oppose it, because Trump wants it. And so that will be taken care of shortly, and we'll go on with it. But it's not the normal way. It's not the appropriate regular order way that we'd like to do in the House, in which the Senate should do, but for the fact that Chuck Schumer and the Democrats block it because they keep the 60 votes from being there. And thus, John Thune doesn't have much choice but to find some alternative that we don't like, but in the end, it will do what needs to be done. Ugly, but it'll get it done.
Congressman, what else should we expect in that reconciliation bill, if anything? What else is going to be placed inside that reconciliation bill?
Well, the first will be skinny, and it will cover caring for ICE and Customs and Border. I know there'll be an effort that I will support to put funding or put the SAVE Act in, and we think we can do it because we can offer a grant payment to states to cover the cost of the special materials, the IDs, etc., if they want to take opportunity from that. So that should, as we've understood, allow the parliamentarian to not stop our efforts to get something that ought to be common sense. And the Democrats ought to support it. Fetterman does, but the rest don't. Ought to support as well to make sure that our elections are fair, legal, and safe. I mean, it's crazy to think that the Democrat state convention just recently held, you had to have ID to get in there. We're finding out now schools in Detroit are putting in place a proposal for protecting kids that not only includes magnetometers, but also a picture ID that has to be displayed by parents or any others coming in to meet with students. And that's the same place that you hear cries about racial profiling and abuse and partisanship about having an ID. If you're something, that's a law already. You have to be a citizen to vote. So we're just simply saying we're going to make sure you're going to have citizenship ID and an ID, picture ID to be able to vote. So we're going to find a way to do that. If we can't do that in this skinny reconciliation bill, then there's a reconciliation 3.0 that we're already working on to add some more savings, fraud prevention, and if necessary, the SAVE Act to get that done before this next election.
Congressman Tim Walberg with us from Michigan's 5th Congressional District. We have a Supreme Court ruling earlier this week from Justice Alito on gerrymandering in congressional districts. Louisiana has paused their House primaries to redraw. Tennessee's looking to perhaps redraw, it sounds like. Florida did redraw this past week. What's your best calculus on how what we've seen this week changes the projections for possible movement come November?
Well, it certainly gives another opportunity to redistrict states that have been under, in this case, what the Supreme Court is saying, unconstitutional requirements. It really amounts to profiling, and what should be frustrating for minority groups is that, like Detroit, because we are a state that uses the profiling aspect that the Supreme Court threw out the other day, it has really cloistered minority districts into basically one district in this state, because that's the only way you could make it happen. And ultimately, it has taken the potential of minorities running and winning in other parts of the state. And so, in some ways, what the Supreme Court did will give more opportunity for fair-minded, real-world thinking minorities to say, "Here's our chance. Finally, we aren't cloistered just to one place. We can expand across the state, and if we have good candidates, they can win, and it doesn't have to be simply, for instance." So, I think the ruling was accurate. And we'll see what comes from it. But this whole redistricting between the 10-year census has really gotten out of hand. Started in New York and on the East Coast, when you see states that have, some states approaching almost 50% Republicans, and you only have 1 or 2 Republican districts out of the entire state. That's why Texas did what it did. And that set off California, which set off Virginia as well. And now Florida is working on it, and it's become a free-for-all. Michigan, we've messed our redistricting up so bad as a result of a so-called bipartisan citizen commission that ended up being made up by Democrats. And now you'll never have a state that really identifies what the majority is in the state.
Congressman Tim Walberg from Michigan's 5th Congressional District. Enjoy your time in Hillsdale today, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. You have a great weekend.
It's daybreak. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy this morning. They're back on Monday here on the program. Thanks so much for being alongside today. One of my favorite authors and favorite guests joins me just for a few minutes here. I wish we had more time. The brand new book is out. It's called Capone's Vault, The Real Story of the Biggest Disaster in Television History. William Elliott Hazelgrove is the author. You can find more at williamhazelgrove.com. The book is amazon.com and elsewhere. William, always great to talk.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Again, we only have about 5, 6, 7 minutes here. Give people the 20,000 foot view. If people weren't, I got to say this, weren't alive at that time, or forget about this event. This was huge. More people watched the Capone's Vault unveiling with Geraldo Rivera than watched the Super Bowl in this year of 1986. So set this up for us. What was this all about?
Sure. 30 million people watched it, like you said. In 1986, they discovered a vault in the bottom of the Lexington Hotel in Chicago. Al Capone ran Chicago from the Lexington Hotel in the 30s. A guy named Weird Harold discovered the vault. He was actually a porn store operator. A guy named Doug Llewellyn out west got hold of it, pitched it to the Tribune Entertainment. They gave them $900,000 to open it. They hire Geraldo Rivera. Everybody is watching this thing. It is the most hyped thing on television. As he said, it's historically the highest rated syndicated show still today. 1 in 3 households watched it, and there was nothing there.
So the book takes us through a little bit of the background of how this came to be, and specifically why Geraldo got involved with this, because Geraldo at this point was a network correspondent for ABC. It was for 2020, and then was fired from ABC and sort of falls into, in some ways, this opportunity to do Capone's Vault. How did Geraldo get involved, and why was he the name attached to this project?
Geraldo was sort of a half carnival barker, half journalist. He had been fired, as you said, ABC. And so they said, look, $25,000 to do this one-off 2-hour live show. And he said, I'll do it for $50,000. And really, I interviewed him. He's a great guy. He said, I needed the money. And his agent said, don't do it. And he said, what if nothing's there? And Geraldo said, I needed the money. And so he became the face of it. And, and again, he was a new breed. He really brought in reality television. I mean, people ask, well, what came out of Capone's Vault? What came out of it was reality television. Before this, people didn't understand that. People just wanted to go for the ride. They didn't care about the payoff. But that's what this show proved. And after that, we had all the reality shows, Cops, everything that followed.
William Elliott Hazelgrove with us. The book is Capone's Vault, The Real Story of the Biggest Disaster in Television History. Now, we already talked, the ratings were fantastic. Tons of people watched. So why do you coin it as a disaster in the subhead of the book?
Okay, Alan Graffman, my producing partner on the movie side, he actually produced this. And he said that all of a sudden they realized nothing was there. So they had 30 million people watching this thing. Geraldo goes and gets drunk. Afterward, barricades himself into the Hilton. And people thought they were going to lose their jobs. This was a great catastrophe. But then Doug Llewellyn, 2 days later, slides the ratings under the door. And Geraldo gets 22 job offers from this thing. So it went from great catastrophe to great success. And actually, Orson Welles did the same thing with War of the Worlds. He thought his career was over. And then suddenly everything flipped and he was off to Hollywood. So it was that high risk, high reward scenario. And television, again, was never the same after this. It was a morphine point for television.
Speaking of War of the Worlds, William has another book, a great book about War of the Worlds, which came out about, 2 years ago at this point. Yeah. Check that one out too. All right, so you got to tell us, what was known, if anything, about what was going to be found that night in the vault? Was there an inkling that there'd be nothing? Was there an inkling there'd be something really scandalous? Did anyone really know for sure what was going to be found when that vault was cracked?
Yeah, well, okay, so the whole thing was Capone, when he went to jail, got syphilis, so he lost his mind, and he couldn't remember where he hid all his money. So everybody thought the Capone's millions were down in the vault. They ran all these tests, all these sonar tests, but they were all inconclusive. And famously, what Geraldo found was 2 bottles. And even the 2 bottles, they took them to a historian who said, no, those are from the 40s. These are from the Capone era. So even the bottles didn't work out. And what for your listeners, what it turned out to be was it was a sidewalk vault. In the 19th century, they built sidewalk vaults for all these hotels where they brought in coal and goods. And that's really what they tunneled into. They knocked down a 5,000-pound slab, blew up the second wall with dynamite. Think about that on live television. That would not happen today. And Geraldo said to me later he thought the whole building was going to come down. And, he was great because he said to me also, I said, well, what do you think your legacy is? And he said, you know what? On my tombstone, they're going to put, there was nothing there.
Yeah. William Elliott Hazelgrove with us. Capone's Vault is the book. We've got about 60 seconds left here. People can go check out the book at Amazon.com or WilliamHazelgrove.com. What's the wildest thing that you found while reporting, whether talking to Geraldo or other people? What's the craziest thing you found out about this night in the broadcast?
Okay, one second before he went on, and you can probably relate to this, he said, where's the teleprompter? And they go, there's not one. He goes, what? And this producer grabbed him by the collar and said, you effing got this. You can do this. And he said to me, he said later, he said, you know what? That kind of settled me down. But he ad-libbed for 2 hours straight. The whole thing was a make it up as you go adventure. Again, they paid almost $1 million to do this thing. They had no idea if anything would be there. And then, boom, 30 million people watched it. Highest rated show today.
Knowing Geraldo now, I think it's not all that incredible he was able to fill 2 hours. If Geraldo can do something, it's still airtime, right? He could do it. All right, Capone's Vault, the real story of the biggest disaster in television history. There's the cover right there. You can find it at Amazon.com and check out WilliamHazelgrove.com for this one and the other great book, many great books, but Dead Air on War of the World as well. William, thanks so much. Look forward to the next one. We'll talk again soon.
Okay, thanks for having me again.
Appreciate it. William Hazelgrove. The book is Capone's Vault here on Daybreak.
Did you know that
It's Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. But that's not me. I'm Scott Bertram. I'm the fill-in guy. I'm with you here this morning. Steve and Ivy back on Monday. So pleased to be with you. Brock is here with a check of sports.
With a look at sports, I'm Brock Palmbush. 3 NBA playoff games last night, all game sixes in round one. New York eliminated Atlanta with a 140-89 thrashing. Knicks win the series 4-2. Philadelphia beat Boston 106-93 to even that series at 3 games apiece. And Minnesota beat Denver 110-98. Timberwolves win the series 4-2. 3 more playoff games tonight. In the NHL playoffs, there were 2 game sixes in round one. Minnesota beat Dallas 5-2 to win that series 4-2, and Anaheim upset Edmonton 5-2 to win that series 4-2. 3 more playoff games are tonight. In Major League Baseball, there were 11 games. American League winners included Baltimore, Minnesota, and Houston. National League winners included Philadelphia, St. Louis, and Milwaukee. And Cam Young shot an 8 under par 64 to take the first-round lead at the PGA Tour's Cadillac Championship in Miami. That's a look at sports. Back to you, Scott.
Thank you, Brock. Appreciate it. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve. As I mentioned, they're back on Monday. This portion of the program brought to you by QE Strong. If you deal with knee pain, joint pain, or stiffness, especially when you're driving or sitting for long stretches, listen to this. You can't take a medical treatment bed with you on the road, but you can keep the QE Red Light Therapy Wand right in your glove box. This handheld device uses red and infrared light combined with proprietary quantum energy technology to target pain right where it hurts. No pills, no appointments, just simple, targeted relief that you can use anytime. It's portable and easy to use, just minutes a day. Go to QEstrong.com. Use the promo code Gruber. Get the QE wand for less than $100. That's QEstrong.com. Promo code Gruber for the QE Red Light Therapy Wand. Just saw some news this morning. Georgia, Matt Kemp there, the governor says they are not going to redraw maps for this election in 2026. This was expected. We're very close to Georgia's primary. However, in the 2028 cycle, I fully expect Georgia to redraw by that point, and others have said this as well. That's a key place where perhaps 2 or 3 new Republican seats could be drawn in Georgia by the 2028 cycle. So something to keep an eye on. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve. Thanks so much for joining us this morning on Daybreak.
America's awake, and we're just getting started. The headlines that matter, the stories they won't tell you, and the voices fighting to be heard. This is your country, your morning, your daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. A new hour starts right now.
Live from the campus of Hillsdale College in beautiful Hillsdale, Michigan. It's Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy on Daybreak. Welcome to it. Here are three big things you need to know on this May 1st of 2026. Number one, a new report says Iran is using the ceasefire to dig out missiles and other munitions that were buried underground. NBC News cites a U.S. official and two other sources saying Iran wants to quickly rebuild its drone and missile capabilities to launch attacks if President Trump decides to resume military operations. The weapons that Iran apparently hid underground or just simply buried under rubble from previous U.S. attacks. Two, President Trump is expanding retirement options for millions of Americans, signing an executive order yesterday to create government-backed retirement accounts for workers without employer plans. It'll offer accounts similar to those available to federal employees. Details and enrollment information on a new website, TrumpIRA.gov. And number three, the average price of a gallon of gas in Michigan, it's higher, up 71 cents in the past week. AAA Michigan says the statewide average is $4.58, but we're way past that here in Hillsdale. $4.99 a gallon in most places. All-time record? Not there yet. It was June of 2022 when the average across the state was $5.22 a gallon. The president says prices will come down once the war in Iran comes to a conclusion. That's where we start hour number 3 here on Daybreak. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve here on the campus of Hillsdale College, where I serve as general manager of the award-winning student radio station WRFH, also a lecturer in journalism and director of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. You hear me hosting shows like the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, heard on many fine radio stations over the weekend across the country and across Michigan. Also, host of a show called Political Beats over at National Review, where my co-host and I talk with people around the world of politics about music and our guest's favorite band and musical artist. We just did XTC Part 1, available now. I also host a number of other programs too. Future Freedom, Wasn't That Special, 50 Years of SNL. I do a lot of stuff. You can find me at scottbertram.com, SCOTBERTRAM.com, and also on X at Scott Bertram. Coming up this hour, hey, Steve Doolin joins us. Also, Seth Barron, brand new book called Weaponized. He's a New York Post editor. And Tim Manella from the Goldwater Institute on DEI and the University of Michigan was saying to Anthony and Brock over the break, I enjoy the weather we're having now in Michigan, which is kind of dreary and cloudy and 48, 50 degrees. I don't like summer. I will hold on to this as long as I possibly can because, unlike Mallory McMorrow, I love Michigan. I was born and raised in Illinois, Chicago area, been up in Michigan now for 10 plus years, and I love it here. I don't wish I were in California. I don't wish I brought California politics to Michigan. I didn't vote in California while claiming to live in Michigan. I didn't do any of those things. If Steve didn't run down, there's a story at CNN this past week that Mallory McMorrow, the Senate candidate, deleted thousands of tweets, including a lot of stuff that, well, might not endear her to Michigan residents, like she doesn't really like the state of Michigan, and she doesn't really like rural Michigan, and she's longing for a future without cars, even though 20% of our state's workforce is connected in some way to the auto industry. And, well, of course, all Trump supporters are Nazis. You can find those reports at CNN.com. The unearthed, deleted tweets of Mallory McMorrow. Boy, the field on the Democratic side for that U.S. Senate seat is really something, isn't it? We'll see what Democrats decide if they pick the anti-Israel candidate, or they pick the candidate who hates Michigan, or they pick the other candidate in the race. Just so many options out there. Speaking of Michigan, I saw this story earlier this week, and I knew I had to save it for our conversation here this morning. Ann Arbor, Michigan, not far from where I'm located here in Hillsdale. Well, they've taken a stand They have put well, I was going to say put a flag in the ground, but that might not be the right comparison based on the story you're about to hear. Ann Arbor officials have removed the last neighborhood crime watch sign in the city. You know these signs. You run down the street, drive down the street, you see neighborhood watch zone, neighbors looking out for neighbors, checking out suspicious activity. We're going to call the police if it looks like something's happening that shouldn't be happening. It's a neighborhood watch zone. We all know what it's about. Maybe we don't. Ann Arbor officials say they're expressions of exclusion, and that's why they're being removed. It's great to see the last of these relics of the past come down, said a city council member. Here's a little bit of a news report. They've taken down 600 signs over the past couple of years, apparently. 600 anti-crime signs, 600 neighborhood watch signs now down in Ann Arbor so they can be more inclusive and a welcoming community. Here's the mayor and a council member of Ann Arbor talking about the effort. This is cut 4.
They're inconsistent with their values. Ann Arbor is a welcoming community. We don't want to push people away. We want to welcome folks in.
There are people that look like me and those from my community that have been questioned, quite frankly, in their own neighborhood by others, wondering what they're doing there. This is just representative of our values and how we want people to feel in Ann Arbor.
All right, there you go. Mayor and city council, it is their expressions of exclusion, said a city council member. The council actually spent $18,000 just this year from the city's cash reserves to remove signs. How much would it cost you to remove a sign? I do it for far less than $18,000. Give me half that. I'll go around a city and take signs out. Outdated relics from when neighborhood watch programs emerged in the 1970s. This is not who we are. This does not align with our values, a council member said. This is a great day, expressing excitement to see the final sign removed. Signs which merely said, this is a neighborhood watch zone. We're looking out for each other. We are going to call the police if we see suspicious activity. And somehow, these anti-crime signs are not inclusive or welcoming enough for Ann Arbor. Well, I fear mentioning this for giving Ann Arbor officials an idea, but I'm going to say it anyway. You know what's coming next, don't you? If the city of Ann Arbor can't have signs saying it's a neighborhood watch zone, we're going to look out for our neighbors, we're going to watch for crime in this area, you know what's happening next? Those signs that you might have, your neighbor might have in front of your house, it says, hey, protected by ADT. Hey, Simply Safe security system. I'm wondering if Ann Arbor is coming after those next. A ban on placing signs on your private property that say, hey, we've got a security system here. Because, look, those are relics of the past that have to come down. Those signs saying your home is protected by ADT, aren't they really just expressions of exclusion? Do those signs really reflect who you are? Do those signs align with the values of your community? Will Ann Arbor officials come after those home security signs next? Open question, I suppose. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve here on Daybreak. It's Daybreak. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve on this Friday morning, heading back in music history, which we do when I guest host 1976. Number one on this day, the Bellamy Brothers with Let Your Love Flow. What a fine song. That reached the top of the charts on this day here in the U.S. back in 1976. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve here on Daybreak. We have to reach our daily quota of Steves on the show. So happy to welcome in Steve Doolin, professor, licensed attorney, frequent Steve Gruber Show guest. Steve, how are you?
Great, Scott. How are you?
Wonderful. Good to see you. I wanted to ask as we start, what is most objectionable to you about the Mallory McMorrow unearthed tweets from this week? The fact that she hates Michigan's weather and wishes she were back in California. The fact that she hates the auto industry and looks for a car-free future. Or the fact that she suggests that all Trump supporters are Nazis and cannot be reasoned with. So what's most objectionable to you?
Well, I'd have to say the whole Nazi thing would be most objectionable. If we're creating a list, that would be number one.
And you don't even have a Nazi tattoo like the soon-to-be Democratic U.S. Senate candidate from Maine.
Right. You know what? I don't have any tattoos, which is a little unusual for a prior service member of my generation, but I've got too many freckles, man. A tattoo would look stupid.
Oh, boy. So a couple of bills running through the Michigan lawmakers this week. Michigan Senate takes up firearm dealer licensing bills. And there's a number of provisions in here. One of those bills would create a state firearm dealer license. And that would require the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs to create a training course for dealers and their employees teaching gun safety alongside business practices to deter firearms from being used for harmful or illegal purposes. What do you think of that, Steve Doolin?
Well, here's the thing. Firearms dealers, stores are already heavily regulated. There's a whole federal department called the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives that licenses dealers under the Gun Control Act in 1968. They have to comply with stringent requirements in terms of doing background checks under the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. They have training available and provided by the ATF when they get their licenses, and on an ongoing basis, they can just pick up the phone and ask for advice as they go through the process. Up until a couple of days ago, they were under a zero tolerance regime that went into place years ago, where they were getting in trouble. I mean, literally written up for using paper clips when they should have used staples on the forms and vice versa. There's an electronic record keeping system that's I think maybe completely switched over to now, where the staple thing isn't such a big deal. But there's already a background check system. They have login numbers for each employee, and the employees can be terminated for using each other's login numbers. If the dealer sells to a disqualified person knowingly, that license is gone. The shop is out of business. So I don't know what the state thinks they're going to add here, except more time spent by the dealers, make it more difficult. It's more hurdles to jump over, and add to the expense. They're trying to make it more expensive to be a gun dealer. They really do just hate guns at this point.
And want to put up as many barriers as possible, as they possibly can, between people exercising their Second Amendment rights, and they want to prevent that as much as possible. And as much as the discussion on the left about the SAVE Act, for example, is about, you've got to have, of course, the talking point, got to have a passport. No one's got a passport. You got to have a passport to vote now. They have no problems, no worries whatsoever about blocking as many Americans as possible from exercising that right that comes right there, Second Amendment.
Right, exactly right. And Clarence Thomas wrote into his opinion in Bruin, and Justice Scalia wrote into his opinion in Heller prior to that, the same sentence, which is that the Second Amendment is not a second-class right. So this is a right that most of us knew already is co-equal to, say, the First Amendment. And yet, these folks have no problem putting all kinds of barriers and all kinds of extra out-of-pocket expense on this
Right.
exercise of a fundamental constitutional right. It's really inconsistent to be nice about it, to be polite.
Steve Doolan with us. I just mentioned off the air, reading some people who attended the White House Correspondents' Dinner. They hear shots fired. Sounds like it's out in the hallway, but certainly close enough. And I've heard, these stories from so many people there who normally would be concealed weapons holders, who have the license, who are concealed or even open carry in some states, right? They hear the gunshots, they go for the weapon and realize it's not there. They can't have it. And that's got to be about the worst feeling in the world for someone in that situation.
Yeah, it reminded me, when you said that, it reminded me of the old saying there, the two worst sounds in the world are click when you expected to hear bang, or bang when you expected to hear click, right? And that feeling of reaching for an empty holster or reaching to where the holster isn't has to be just a heart stopper there for a minute when you realize you're completely defenseless in a situation where somebody else is shooting. I said I like to sort of imagine that President Trump is carrying a 45 under his jacket. I hope they put him in some kind of Kevlar, at least put him in a Kevlar jacket. He made a funny joke the other day when asked about that. He didn't think he could afford to look like he was 20 pounds heavier because he's got a great sense of humor. But we know that folks who are used to carrying every day really, they all use the same word, which is naked without the gun.
Yeah, we played that cut earlier in the program, and it was funny because the press members, the media members, most of them in that room don't want to laugh at the president's joke, but it was perfect. Like, I don't know if I can add 20, 30 pounds. It makes me look heavier. I don't know if I can do that.
Yeah, he's self-deprecating. He's a good, he's a salesman. He's a good comedian too, right?
It's Daybreak. Scott Bertrand sitting in for Steve this morning. Thanks so much for being alongside. After the bottom of the hour here, about 10 minutes away, we'll talk with Seth Barron. Got a brand new book called Weaponized. He's a New York Post editor. We'll discuss that. And then before we're done today, also Tim Minella from the Goldwater Institute on University of Michigan DEI cuts might not be exactly what they seem. This portion of the Steve Gruber Show brought to you by Patriot Mobile. Every day, Americans are making choices that shape our country's future, right down to what cell phone provider you support. Here's what most people don't realize. Patriot Mobile isn't just a wireless provider. They're an activist organization funded by selling top-tier cell phone service. They've been on the front lines defending our freedoms long before it was cool, standing in the gap when others would not. The best part is, they deliver prioritized premium service on all three major U.S. networks, giving you the same or possibly even better coverage backed by 100% U.S.-based customer support. Get unlimited data plans, mobile hotspots, international roaming, and more. When you switch to Patriot Mobile, you'll help grow a movement that fuels the Christian conservative cause. Every bill you pay helps advance the values of faith, family, and freedom. Switching is easier than ever. Activate in minutes. Keep your number, keep your phone, or upgrade. Take a stand today. Go to patriotmobile.com/Gruber or call 972-PATRIOT. Use the promo code Gruber for a free month of service. That's patriotmobile.com/Gruber or call 972-PATRIOT and make the switch today. This will evoke some nostalgia for people of a certain age, which is around my age. Remember the Pizza Hut Book It program? Read a bunch of books, get free pizza at Pizza Hut. Man, that's all we did when I was a kid. And then it went away. Well, Pizza Hut has announced the Book It program is back. Summer of Stories is what they're calling it now. Kids can earn personal pan pizzas and more for meeting reading goals. It's open for kids pre-K through 6th grade. It runs June 1st to August 31st. Parents and teachers can sign kids up for the summer reading program through the Book It app. So look for that. Yeah, man, nothing better than when I was a kid. Earn the free pizza, personal pan pizza. Head to Pizza Hut. Oh, good stuff. And it's back for our kids today. More of Daybreak next.
Picking up the pieces of my sweet shattered dream. I wonder how
It's Daybreak. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve on this Friday morning. Steve and I be back on Monday on the program. On this day back in 2023, the great Gordon Lightfoot passed away at the age of 84 years old. Carefree Highway is what we hear this morning. Gordon Lightfoot, he's Canadian. We still like him okay. He passed away on this day back in 2023. Seth Barron joins us now. He's still very much alive, and he has a brand new book out. He's also on the editorial board at the New York Post. The book is Weaponize: The Left's Capture and Destruction of America's Sacred Institutions. There's the cover. Seth, thanks so much for joining us here on Daybreak.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Scott. I really appreciate it.
So before we start, tell us, how are you holding up so far in Mayor Mamdani's New York City?
Well, fortunately, he can't get into our apartments and make the bathrooms free to anyone yet. But we're waiting. We're waiting.
Weaponize begins, as everything should these days, Seth, with a land acknowledgement. Perhaps not one that we're used to hearing, though. Tell us about that.
Oh, I just thought it would be fun to have a land acknowledgement where I kind of celebrate the fact that Manhattan was legally purchased from the Lenape and then settled and colonized and capitalized by merchants, explorers, workers. So it was like my cheeky little jab at the land acknowledge at the genre of the land acknowledgement.
It's a fun way to start. There's no doubt about that. And then Weaponize goes through 4 major areas: citizenship, policing, housing, education, in which the left is capturing in hopes for destruction. I want to talk about policing first. This defund the police movement, which was a big deal on the left, and then it was sort of tamped down, quieted down a little bit. At least wasn't talked about quite as openly. No, we don't really believe that. But Seth, we now have socialists being elected in New York City, one essentially in Chicago, in Seattle, elsewhere. As more big cities elect more socialist mayors, are we going to be seeing more blatant, more obvious nods towards this idea that the police should be defunded? And heck, in Illinois, the Safety Act, you have people who are not being held anymore and going on to commit horrendous crimes.
Oh, we're seeing the same thing in New York. Yes, absolutely. This is a key value of the left, and it has been since the '60s to push towards, the abolition of the police, essentially the legalization of chaos, I guess you could say. Yeah, it's a core value. I find what the left does, and this comes straight out of Lenin, is they go too far. And they do it intentionally because the point of going too far is to see what the limits are. Then they can regroup and plan for the next time. So sure, defund the police, eliminating the police, that sounds really crazy and made everybody think like these people have gone too far. So they've retreated for now, but this is certainly a top priority for them.
Seth, we see evidence every day that policing works, which shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, right? But the surge in Washington, D.C., we've seen violent crime plummet in Washington, D.C. since President Trump made those moves. We've also seen a couple of transit agencies, make sure people pay, begin arresting people, vagrants who might be using the system. And in those places, you're seeing that destruction and crime and vandalism has dropped by like 95, 96%. Crazy type numbers. This shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that policing works. If you want safer communities, safer transit systems, policing works.
Oh, absolutely it works. But I don't think keeping the streets safe and so forth, that's not a top priority for the left. I mean, I think they think it's fine, but there's better ways to achieve it, namely by addressing the root causes of crime, or what they think to be the root causes of crime. More funding for schools, higher taxes, free housing. So they see it as like, well, you can use a hammer or a scalpel, and to them, the scalpel is preferable.
Seth Barron is with us. His new book is Weaponize: The Left's Capture and Destruction of America's Sacred Institutions. Education. We talked to a reporter earlier today about a new research project that says $1 billion over the past 10 years have been funneled through teachers' unions to Democratic candidates and Democratic causes across the country. This is May Day. You have teachers' unions across the country, specifically one in Chicago, which demanded a day off so the teachers could go demonstrate and bring students along with them. What is the real damage being done by teachers' unions and leftist politics infiltrating public schools and many other schools across the country?
I mean, it's not just the schools they've infiltrated, it's the entire political system. I would say, I didn't catch the number. You said a billion over 10 years or 2 years? Because
A billion over 10 years was the report.
I would say that's a radical understatement. The teachers' unions funnel at least $1 billion a year into elections and political activity. And it's hard to count because it's at the federal level, state level, local level. This is issue driven spending. It's all kinds of things. The teachers union is probably the single most destructive institution in America today. They were the ones who kept the COVID lockdown going for as long as it did, threatening to keep the schools keep the schools shut. They demanded hundreds of billions of dollars in funding for you know essentially just for the teachers. They're terrible. I mean, they are a government paid agent of you know chaos. Essentially, they seek to. I mean, they see. Look, let me just say, Randy Weingarten, the head of the AFT, just wrote a book called "Why Fascists Fear Teachers," and she says there's four fundamental things that teachers do. And the first three are kind of anodyne, community, education. And the fourth is they provide a great model of labor labor relations for the working people of America. So what she's saying is the most fundamental value of the teachers unions is that of education is that they give the teachers something to do. They give teachers unions a place to exist. This is the fundamental view of education for the teachers with teachers unions, which is their ownership over the American children.
You got about 60 seconds left with Seth Barron. His new book is called Weaponized on the issue of housing. You write here, density. A lot of talk about this on the left, driving people back into cities and densely populated areas. Not really aimed at affordability. It's aimed at density. Density is aimed at density. Right. Why does the left want to force people into these areas?
Marriage, simply put, marriage and family are highly correlated with conservative voting and conservative values. It's harder to control people if they're not contained in one little space. So this is essentially the basis for the left's hatred of suburbs and rural America. So just to quickly put a cap on it.
Weaponize the left's capture and destruction of America's sacred institutions. Seth Barron is the author. He's also on the editorial board over at the New York Post. You can find that at Amazon.com and elsewhere. Seth's also on X as well at Seth Barron NYC. Seth, thanks so much for joining us here this morning on Daybreak.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Appreciate it. Tim Manella from the Goldwater Institute coming up next, talking about University of Michigan and DEI. Scott Bertram in for Steve here on Daybreak. It's Daybreak. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy. They're back on Monday. We wish a happy birthday today to country music star and pretty good actor as well, Tim McGraw. See him in a number of films and also tons of hits on the country charts. I'm not a huge modern country fan, but this song I've always liked from Tim McGraw called Diamond Rings and Old Bar Stools from it's more than a decade ago at this point. Tim McGraw turns 59 years old today. Happy birthday to him. Scott Bertram in for Steve. It's Daybreak. Tim Manella joins us. He's Director of Higher Education at the Goldwater Institute. More at goldwaterinstitute.org. Recent piece, University of Michigan conceals DEI despite promises of reform. Tim, thanks so much for joining us.
Great to be here, Scott. Thanks for having me.
So we did hear after President Trump won his second term and took office about cleaning up these DEI programs at universities and colleges across the country. And I think even the president said at one point, you're not going to be able to get away with simply changing the name, right? You can't call it something else and still do the same things. You actually have to root out the actual DEI programs. And maybe that's not happening, or maybe that's not the case in certainly specific institutions, and University of Michigan among them. What have you found? What's still happening on these campuses?
So for the University of Michigan, they perhaps embraced the DEI agenda more than any other university in the country. They spent about $250 million on DEI. They employed over 150 people in DEI positions. Then in 2025, they said, we've seen the light. We are shutting down our DEI offices. This was a big press release that they issued saying that they would do this. A recent report from Mark Perry, who's an economist at University of Michigan Flint, an economist emeritus, he found that 84% of the DEI staff from 2025 are still employed by the university. That's in line with regular staff turnover, so that really doesn't represent any sort of shutting down of any DEI program at all. What they've done instead is, like you've said, simply change the names of offices. The Office of DEI has become the Office of Access, Community, and Belonging. They've changed job titles as well. It just shows that it seems like they issued this announcement to sort of get the Trump administration and the public off their back, public realizing that this is a discriminatory waste of money. And they haven't really done anything substantive to end the DEI boondoggle here and concentrate more on increasing opportunity and restoring excellence in teaching and scholarship.
Tim, the same report indicates that the total amount spent by Michigan on salaries for DEI employees increased between 2025 and 2026. And I've heard a few, hidden camera type things. Is the plan here simply to wait things out? Trump's going to be gone at some point. We'll have a change in the White House. We can go about business as usual. Are these universities and colleges, many of them, just planning to wait things out?
I believe so. And I've seen the reports that you have, that you've got staff embedded in these institutions that say, we're doing the same thing we've always done. We're just changing the name of what we're doing to hide it from the legislature. It shows the need for states to take this seriously and to pass policies modeled on Goldwater's Abolish DEI Bureaucracies reform that really precisely targets this sort of activity. This has to be done at the state level. And what our policy says is it doesn't matter what you call it. It defines very specifically that you can't promote differential treatment based on race. You can't promote discrimination in any form even under the banner of DEI or access or community or belonging. That's the important state legislation that has to happen here in every state in the country.
Several states have adopted those reforms, Texas and Iowa among them. So we know in Michigan, spending's actually increased. Do we have any tangible results from those states where these abolished DEI bureaucracy reforms have been passed?
Yes, I think we do. And I will say that the hidden camera investigations have indicated that in states like Iowa and Texas, there is still resistance. But what we have in those states is legislation in place that the law enforcement arms of those states, the attorney general and otherwise, can use to go after this problem. The strongest pieces of legislation, I would emphasize this, give a private right of action. In other words, an individual can sue for the continuation of illegal DEI programs. That to me is the strongest way that we do this. It's important to give the attorney general cause of action here, but even more critical, I think, to give the individual cause of action so that a hostile AG, for instance, cannot just ignore this legislation. The individual can take action here.
We've got about 60 seconds left here with Tim Menelo from the Goldwater Institute. These are public universities in many cases. Does that mean that we should expect transparency and accountability? Can we keep track of how some of these universities are adjusting, changing, trying to evade these new regulations?
Yeah, we have to keep our eye on the ball here, and we have to keep holding these institutions accountable. You're absolutely right that they're public institutions and they are ultimately answerable to the state legislatures and to the people of that state. And the state legislatures have to follow up with the effective policies that they pass. They have to call administrators of these institutions in for hearings and otherwise, and they need to continue to take this seriously. Take what's being uncovered in these journalistic investigations seriously. We know that these institutions are going to resist, and we have to keep up the pressure.
Tim Menelo is Director of Higher Education at the Goldwater Institute, goldwaterinstitute.org. You can see his story on the University of Michigan concealing DEI despite promises of reform. Tim, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate it.
Welcome back to Daybreak. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve this morning. Again, you can find me on X at Scott Bertram, SCOTBERTRAM. Follow there. Would appreciate it. Also, scottbertram.com, where you can find all my media doings. New show this week for the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour on many of these fine radio stations on the weekend. Also in podcast form. Big, long interview this week with the great, fantastic, wonderful, personal friend of mine, Molly Hemingway, a senior journalism fellow here at Hillsdale, and the brand new book on Sam Alito, Supreme Court Justice. It's great. We go in depth on the program this week. You can check that out. This portion of the Steve Gruber Show brought to you by GhostBed. GhostBed doesn't build mattresses like furniture. They build engineered sleep systems. Their beds are serious health equipment designed for relief and recovery, not looks and not fluff. Your body should be healing while you sleep, not fighting for comfort. You'll notice the difference right away. If you're waking up stiff, tossing and turning, if you're sleeping hot, even reaching for a pain reliever before bed, hoping tonight will be different. That's not just aging. That could be your mattress talking to you. Here's another thing to love about GhostBed. You'll get 101 nights to try it at home. If you don't feel the difference in 3+ months, send it back risk-free. GhostBed's offering Steve's audience their lowest prices of the season, plus an extra 10% off. Ghostbed.com/Gruber. Use the promo code Gruber. That's ghostbed.com/Gruber. And the promo code Gruber to try GhostBed free for 101 nights. If you have 101 Dalmatians, you can sleep with each of those dogs on a separate night before deciding if you want to keep the bed or not. I mean, can't get better than that. Ghostbed.com/Gruber, promo code Gruber. I wanted to play something, and I don't think, nope, we're not going to have time. That's okay. Seattle socialist mayor, by the way, is seemingly unconcerned about people leaving the city and leaving the state due to new taxes, saying, bye. Essentially, don't let the door hit you on the way out. This is a big problem for Seattle. Starbucks is leaving. They're going to Tennessee and Nashville. And these big city socialist mayors seemingly don't care when people leave and take their money with them. They're going to care. They're going to ask for bailouts. That's going to be next. All these big city socialist mayors saying, hey, DC, help us out. Have a great weekend.